Tashidele. Hello and goodbye in Tibetan. Tashidele. So it's good to see all of you, and let's get started today with our unit on Tibetan Buddhist ritual. Okay, so the thing is, all forms of Buddhism have some, ritual system. I mean, even when you get to stuff like Zen and Chan that say they're kind of anti-ritual, they have rituals set up around their meditative practices. So in Theravada, you'll see monks will generally do sort of rituals that bless people. There are ritualized almsgiving and begging, some mendicancy. There's a lot of chanting and Pali. There's blessings. Sometimes they even will make amulets and whatnot. But when you get right down to it, the Tibetans just have the most elaborate system of ritual in the Buddhist world. So Tibetan Buddhism is Tantra. So it develops from the fully rendered Vajrayana, the vehicle of the adamantine diamond thunderbolt from India. And it's also called the Mantrayana, the vehicle of mantras. So their ritual system is incredibly intricate. And it really kind of, the Tibetans sort of take, ritual in a direction that, I mean, it's there in the Indian system, but they just take it so much further. They just sort of supercharge the ritual systems found in Indian Tibetan Buddhism, or in Indian Vajrayana Buddhism. So the majority of Buddhist practice, whether it's individuals or in groups, is highly ritualized. Group rituals are acted out rites that include actions, so like doing actual stuff in the ritual, but also mantras, so spoken spells or spoken liturgy. Mudras, mudra, the word means seal. So here's one. This means, this isn't okay. This is a mudra that means sort of like general blessing and goodness. In the Indian context, I've always heard these are the three gunas, remember them from Sankhya, this is man and God, and they are one. Or there's abhaya mudra, like this, have no fear. You'll see deities doing this all the time. Have no fear. Abhaya, no fear, no danger. So mudras and various forms of meditations. So offerings and rites can include music and highly structured chanting. Now, I'll give you some examples of Tibetan Buddhist chanting. I cannot chant in 3 to 4 tones, but you spend a lot of time doing these meditative practices. And let's say here's one Tibetanized mantra that I used to use all the time. See, it's even lower than like, if I was saying that in like when I chant in Sanskrit, so it's lower. And Tibetans get to the point where when they do this a lot and they really get good at this style of chanting, it's so low that it almost like rattles your spine as you listen to people chanting. And then the music is this cacophonous, wonderful thing of people playing those long horns and playing flutes made out of human thigh bones, and then the big drums. So the music is cacophonous as well, but lovely. I had a Thai Buddhist monk one time. I was asking him what kind of chanting he liked the most, and he said Tibetan. And I'm like, you don't know Tibetan? He's like, yeah, I know, but I think it's the most pleasant to listen to. And I'm like, I'm like, oh, all right, but you do get into it. I remember I was in my undergraduate, and a friend of mine said, come here, you got to hear this. And he said, I got this CD. It's this wonderful, relaxing Tibetan Buddhist chanting. I'm like, yeah. He turns it on, and I was like, what the heck is that? He's like, I don't know. I think they're summoning the elder gods. So when you're not used to it, it sounds a little bit frightening sometimes, but once you get used to it, it's really a beautiful style of chanting. It's actually quite difficult. I've never been good at it myself. Then there's also the offering of tormas. A torma is it's made of parched barley flour and colored butters, and they can be very elaborate, as you see here. I've known Tibetan Buddhists that will spend hours per day just making tormas to do rituals for like the end of the week. And then there's also quite a bit of visualization practices. And in fact, we're going to look at 2 specific practices to the god Avalokiteshvara, or the Buddha Avalokiteshvara, that are visualized. We're going to talk about what visualization means. So visualization is common in esoteric or Tantra Hinduism, but Tibetan Buddhism has some of the most elaborate visualization practices and techniques that I've ever encountered. Visualized rites can be designed originally as sort of mental practices. So they're originally So they're like sort of originally designed to be done in your head and visualized. Or in other ways, they can be internalized rituals. So it might be a ritual that was originally done externally, and then one, instead of doing it, they imagine themselves doing it, but it's an active visualizing oneself doing it. And when one does a visualized, interiorized ritual, it is considered as effective as actually acting it out. In this sense, so tantras can have internalized rites that are done in order to do all of the transgressive rituals, including sexual activity, consuming liquor, consuming meat, and whatnot, but not actually physically doing it. So this can be for a couple of reasons. One, you don't actually pollute yourself, although that does sort of defeat the point of tantra. Or in another way, you can see that by removing the frame of activity from the physical realm to the mental realm, you can imagine having these grand, elaborate sacrifices and offerings and whatnot, and you don't have to actually physically get them all together. So in a sense, you're able to be more effective at ritual use. I do think that when rituals, though, become visualized, they're almost anesthetized. They sort of lose a lot of their power from them. And one distinction that one of my teachers, David White, makes in study of Indian Tantra is you have hardcore and softcore Tantra. Hardcore Tantra is the oldest form. This is actually doing physical rituals, actually doing magic rites, actually having transgressive sex and consuming impure substances, versus softcore, which is where everything is visualized and whatnot. And he argues that the further away you get from the hardcore version, the more Tantra sort of gets less diffuse, more elite. And yeah, I think that's all I have to really say about that right now. Okay, so what is a sadhana? The word sadhana means a discipline or a practice. So sadhana is a ritual practice. It can be any ritual that sort of does something. In practice, though, when somebody describes a sadhana, it usually means that they're going to do a regular practice. Here, we're going to see that a lot of these practices are visualized. So when somebody talks about a sadhana to Avalokiteshvara, this is a interiorized visualization. One thing I do notice about these sadhanas is they follow patterns that we find in Indian temple worship. So you invoke the deity, you praise and offerings, then you have specific mantra, then you have meditation, then you have dismissal of the deity, and a dedication of merit, or a description or a chanted description of what that ritual will do for you. So all of these steps are found in these interiorized ritual practices. Okay, so when you're doing, when you're visualizing, you have to sort of pay attention to your perspective, and this is a little crazy. So is the God that you are visualizing, is he right in front of you? Is he on top of you? Is he inside you? Are you that God? Now, this seems really complicated at first. And I asked the Lama one time about some philosophical question about non-duality and how a person could essentially be a deity they're visualizing, but are they always the deity? And if you can merge with the deity together in this ritual practice, can you also merge with everyday life? And he looks at me and he's like, and he says through his translate, he's like, this guy needs to go do some more deity yoga. This stuff will get clear. So it's a practice. You're trying to be able to most clearly see that deity. They say to the point that you can even visualize and see the sweat on the god or goddess's brow and on their body. They should become completely real, and you practice generating this mental world. And it's a long practice that, once really well developed, leads to some pretty profound meditative states. And one thing I wanted to mention quickly is this term pragmatic or transcendental. This is an argument about modes of religion set up by a guy named Mandelbaum. And I use this a lot in my work. So pragmatic, we've talked about this before. Pragmatic, I lost my goat, my kid is sick, I need a good grade on the exam, I need to make my MBI. Transcendental, I want to get salvation, I want to get liberation, I want to develop my spirituality, I want my group to be more cohesive together, I want to affirm social function. Pragmatic or transcendental. Sadhanas can be both, but as we're looking here, we're going to be looking at our first two sadhanas will be transcendental, and the last one is about hail aversion will be pragmatic. So let's take a look first at these two Avalokiteshvara sadhanas. Now, Avalokiteshvara means the Lord who looks down upon us or upon everything in Sanskrit. In Tibetan, his name is Chenrezig, which means sort of like the big guy who has rays of light from his eyes. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is a rite of empowerment. Now, the word for empowerment, I don't have this on the slide, is Wang. That's spelled D-B-A-N-G because it's Tibetan. So what is an empowerment? Well, a Wang, or empowerment, enables and authorizes a person to do the practices of a sadhana. So when one wants to learn a sadhana, they go to a lama, and the lama puts on these empowerment rituals. These empowerment rituals will do a number of things. First off, they are initiations. You're being initiated into the practice dedicated to a specific deity. Also, there's what's called the lung, R-L-U-N-G-S, lung, which is the reading transmission, which is the lama reads the text in his own voice out loud while demonstrating to you how to do the ritual. And then also there's this other status that of the initiation that a lot of lamas describe, and they say that this is the most essential part, is that there's a psychic transmission. There's a transmission from the lama to the person, to the congregants. So people will take these initiations in order to learn a practice and be authorized to do that practice and have the ability to do the practice. But some folks just go for general blessings. A lot of Tibetans will just go to get an empowerment just in general because it's good for you, gives you a long life, gives you good health. I heard recently that a lama, on the advent of the coronavirus, had said that those people that had finished this long sequence of empowerments would be protected from the coronavirus because they'd had this empowerment. To which my friend, who is a member of this congregation, his head about exploded. He was so mad about this. And I called him. I'm like, look, man, this is how it works. This is what's in the text. This is what they say. That's the traditional argument that's made. So as I said before, empowerment transmits the knowledge of the ritual, demonstrates the ritual, reads the text, and often these days you'll get, if you go to an empowerment, they'll have a printed out version of the text, and if you're a Westerner, they have translation, so it'll be in Tibetan and then the translation. So you can then take that text with you and do the practices described in that text in your home, on your own. You can continue to do them for the rest of your life. What also happens is you are given the authority to practice, the permission to practice this text. And finally, what's transmitted is the Gnostic potency from the lama into the person. So there's like almost a magical insight power that moves from lama to the people hearing it within the empowerment. Also, if you get those empowerments, you're in the lineage. You are in the lineage of the lama who gave it to you, and you're in the lineage of the sadhana itself, of the whole text. So everybody that goes through the empowerment together, they call them Vajra twins afterward. You're basically, anybody you go through the initiation with, you're considered to be spiritually related to. Most Tibetans will say a mantra or sadhana without these proper empowerments is considered worthless and will never come to any end. All right, Deity Yoga. This is the type of practice we're doing. In Deity Yoga, I'm drinking tea, but we're talking about Tibet, so I should be having Tibetan butter tea. Here's a quick recipe for you. This is how my Tibetan teacher in Wisconsin taught me how to make butter tea. Get yourself some really dark Chinese tea. Brew it up, dark as heck. Get a blender. Put that tea in the blender, very hot. Then add a bunch of butter. I recommend the unsalted butter for this. And then I'd say put in just a little bit of salt, depends on your taste. And then top it off with a whole bunch of half and half or heavy cream. Whip that up in the blender, pour it in a cup, have yourself a sip, and I'll tell you, it's something tasty, but remember to yourself as you take that sip, don't think tea, think soup. And there's one scholar who argued that the reasons that Tibetans had written so many wonderful scriptures was in fact the voluminous and ridiculous amount of butter tea that they drank. But butter tea is delicious. It takes a little doing. Often a common Tibetan breakfast will be tsampa, which is toasted barley flour mixed with butter tea into sort of like a paste, and then you kind of roll it in a ball and just eat it. I think it's terrible. some of my friends think it's great. Okay, so Deity Yoga. In Deity Yoga, a person visualizes oneself as an enlightened Buddha. This also involves seeing the Buddha and the Lama as being the same. So what you do is you imagine the Lama, then you imagine the Lama as the Buddha, then you imagine that the Buddha is before you, then you imagine you are the Buddha. So there's this shifting of practices until you're able to generate yourself as being this perfect ideal that is identical to the Lama, that is identical to the Buddhas. So this is a type of practice we call the generation stage. It's preliminary to other practices. It's also where most Westerners get stuck. If you're really to try practicing Tibetan Buddhism, people tend to do Deity Yoga for a little while and like, I don't want to do this anymore. Because it's not as kind of thrilling as, say, some of the more completion stage stuff. Now, when I say completion stage, I mean something like Dzogchen, the great perfection. This is when you are meditating with your eyes open, you're realizing the essential connection of the mind and all space and all things all around you. Very exciting. Tibetans would say, don't even think about that until you've been doing Deity Yoga for like 10 years. Especially at Gelugpa would say, don't even think about any of that philosophy until you have done a ton of generation stuff. So I've given this term Dzogchen, which means the great perfection, and then there's also the Sanskrit term Charya, which just means an activity. Think of this as the difference between sort of seeing the essential Gnostic underpinnings of the universe and making offerings of stuff into a fire. Dzogchen versus Charya. Now, Deity Yoga is never really transcended. It's thought to be the basics of all other practice, but Tibetan monks continue to do this this Deity Yoga for their entirety of their career. They're always building off of it. In some places, they say that the three jewels of Tibetan Buddhism are the Buddha, the Lama, and the Dakanis, the female spirits that enable tantric practice. They're the very force of religion. So we're used to three jewels are Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. But in this, they're really arguing that these other three jewels are the Lama, who is your teacher, the Buddha, who is him essentially, and the swirling mass of feminine energies around that are channeled through all religious practice. So here we're going to be looking at this Avalokiteshvara sadhana. Now, Avalokiteshvara is this great Buddha who was also, the Dalai Lama is an incarnation of. His mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum, which I have on the above. And then actually I have that stylized written here in the circle with his key seed syllable, Hri. So Hri is what's called a bija syllable, a seed syllable. The bija syllable is supposed to contain the essence of the very Buddha, but it is a syllable that has no syntactic meaning. I know with a lot of these meditations, you will imagine like a ball of light with the syllable in it that you'll be moving around your body, or you'll visualize a blazing Tibetan symbol, and then out of that symbol will become a radiant amount of clear light that will coalesce to become Avalokiteshvara. His main mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, means Om, reverence to him who bears the lotus and the jewel. It is not Om, the jewel in the lotus. That really doesn't make any sense, but that's what most people say it means. This is also the national mantra of Tibet. All right, so what is empowerment? So these are these wangs again. So the empowerment rite is a sort of guided mystical experience. And what happens is the Lama will be seated in the front, and he'll have previously put up like a torma or some sort of a tanka, so a painting of the deity usually behind him. Everybody will leave the room, and he'll do these secret rituals, which are generally making a mandala or a ritual circle that he visualizes, and then the whole ritual space, the space where he's going to sit and give these teachings, is thought to be in a Buddha field surrounded by all sentient beings and all the Buddhas. So he creates that with his mind and puts it into the room. Then he'll often invoke his yidams, his like powerful tutelary deities. During this time, and I always try to sneak around and look to see what's in their secret little box. They always have a cardboard box, all the stuff that they do their initial rites that no one can see in. And there's always raw meat, a little bit of liquor, and some flowers for these secret rituals that nobody knows what they do. But they're generating that space. And then the door opens and everybody files in, and you sit down, you usually take refuge, you do a couple mantras, and then the ritual begins. This is important because this is how so many initiation rituals work. And that the teacher prepares the space, then brings the people into the space, then he delivers the teachings that are a form of initiation. Yes. So one of the things that the Tibetans have that I find really interesting is they say a successful Wang, a successful empowerment will cause signs. These signs can be external or internal, ranging from people just having spontaneous, really good vibes, or them just having really like sudden aspiration, or the mind goes very clear, spontaneous singing. I've seen that before. Body shaking. That's happened to me. And POA practices, which are practices to project the consciousness out of the top of the head at the time of death. This is, if it's successful, it's said that someone can come behind you and take a long piece of string, or it looks like a piece of spaghetti, and they go whack, and it just goes whack, and it supposedly goes into a hole in your forehead. I've seen this happen. I don't get it, but it does happen. Okay, so in this Avalokiteshvara empowerment in particular, we're really talking about empowering a Torma. So consecrating a Torma, putting the energy of Avalokiteshvara in the Torma, but it's the same principle as what the Lama does when he empowers one to do practices. So how does this work? It's not just the person that is empowered, but it is the Torma that has all this energy put into it. And let's just quick walk through this ritual. So first, in your preliminary stages, someone sets out the image of the Bodhisattva. So here, the four-armed Avalokiteshvara and the Torma in front of it. Then the practitioner takes refuge, takes the Bodhisattva vow. Remember, that's the vow that I will not become enlightened until all other sentient beings before me have become enlightened. And then he generates an aspiration. The aspiration here is to empower the Torma. Next, one visualizes oneself in a pure form, and the syllable free, again, the syllable of Avalokiteshvara, enters the mandala. So you're seeing this perfect Buddha field. You see the syllable free. You see that this Buddha field is filled with all the sentient beings of all times. And next, one makes offerings. So he makes offerings of music and burns incense. Here it's particularly noxious, acrid incense, which is interesting. And then one waits for an internal sign while making the Vajra Mudra. Now, for the actual practice, he takes a number of flowers in his hand. And this is great because this is an Avalokiteshvara Torma here. It's a very elaborate one, and it has the seed syllable free right at the top there, right in the middle. Right there. It's a little bit of writing that you can't read in Tibet. What are you going to do? So that's made of actually flour and butter. And the butter is actually colored, so they sort of layer the butter on top. And then that top piece there is made of wood. But yeah, the majority of it is made of butter and flour. It's sort of like very elaborate cake decorating. So you take up these flowers, and then you request the blessing of Avalokiteshvara. Now, the Torma is visualized as becoming Avalokiteshvara himself. So the Torma becomes Avalokiteshvara. Then, as in the visualizing, it completely dissolves into light, and one begins to do mantric practices. So Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. What happens then is there's a description in the text of the power and the blessings of the Bodhisattva. And then one takes this Torma that's been empowered and touches himself or touches the bodies of others. And the idea is that this puts Avalokiteshvara into other people. Then one visualizes the God and the individual dissolving into light. So there's only clear light left, Buddha said, clear light. And then the initiate eats the Torma, have a little nibble of it. Okay, so finally, we see that there should hopefully be signs of some form. One should make a vow to maintain your vows. Actually, you should give thanks to the deity, and then you dedicate the merit of this ritual to the benefit of all living beings. Now let's look a little bit more specific Avalokiteshvara sadhana. So practice to Chenrezi. What you see above here is actually these are wooden boxes that are sadhana boxes. So the Tibetan books are like these long sheets of paper that are about 4 inches by 8 to 12 inches. And you'll go and get up and you'll do a practice, and then you'll get a copy of this. And then you take it home and you do the practice how the guru taught you. But you get stuck with all these papers. So, and they're all loose leaf, they're not bound together. So people often have these elaborate boxes that they put these in. I've got a couple of them, but I don't have them here. Otherwise, I'd show to you. All right, so this ritual we're going to look at is an Avalokiteshvara sadhana. So a sadhana to Chenrezig, a practice to Chenrezig. The text is from the 14th to 15th century, and it's called For All Beings Throughout Space. Now, the guy who wrote this text, as it was revealed by a vision, was actually a bridge builder from the 14th to 15th century. And he had this idea that he wanted to make a form of Deity Yoga, once again, that could be easily practiced without elaborate ritual and that anybody could do it. And he writes in a very clear, tight style of terse Tibetan writing. So you'd be able to memorize this text and be able to have the sequence of rituals really easily in your head. The goal of this rite isn't to empower a Torma. The goal here is self-transformation, spiritual development. This is very much a transcendental rite. You're not doing anything with it. You are evolving oneself in one's own mind and practices. So before you can even do this ritual, you have to have empowerment and instruction. You'll usually get your instruction at the time of the empowerment. So when the Lama does the ritual to empower you to do this ritual, he also teaches you how to do the ritual. So you've got that going. And the first thing you do is you take refuge. So, I bow and have reverence and take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Lama, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. They often add a fourth one, say the Lama in there, because they're so sort of guru-oriented in this. Now, there is an addendum to Deity Yoga called Guru Yoga, which is all of the stuff with Deity Yoga, except that you are more focused on the Guru. Still not butter tea. All right, so you take refuge. All right, now, what you're going to do is you're going to visualize Avalokiteshvara in his fourfold pleasant form. We're going to talk about wrathful deities in just a second, as opposed to peaceful ones. And one should, at the end of this, be able to see himself or herself as the very body, speech, and mind of that visualized deity. So what's the procedure? The first thing you need to do is you need to generate the mandala. So here's an Avalokiteshvara mandala here. Now, you should see oneself at the center of the mandala, and then it's like three-dimensional space. At the edges are like wild, crazy wild animals and demons. Then as you get closer, there's Buddhas and living people. They get closer and closer, Buddhas and Buddhas and Buddhas getting progressively more sophisticated, powerful, and elite, and you are at the center of that space. In this way, it's sort of like a mesocosm. So the mesocosm is a space between the earth and the heavens. This is sort of like this, your ritual visualized space is somewhere below heaven and above the earth. All right. So the deity is visualized atop one's head and then as oneself. Now, different texts that we'll read about locate the deity to be visualized in front of the practitioner and sometimes as the practitioner. This text is a little wild because you start by seeing the Buddha above you, by seeing Avalokiteshvara above you, but then seeing it as you afterward throughout the text. And we'll see this in just a second. So one of the first things, and I find this to be one of the most striking images, is that one imagines that there is a sort of like a lotus stalk that comes out of the back of your head or your fontanelle, which is people debate where it comes from, and theoretically from all the other beings around that all kind of float upward. Atop that lotus is a flower. Atop that lotus stalk is a flower, and atop that is a moon, and atop that you visualize Avalokiteshvara. So it's a powerful image. So there's an idea that you're seeing the deity above oneself, and how does that deity manifest? Well, it starts with, the deity starts here as being the syllable Hri. And actually this is Hri at the end of the syllable of that Tibetan there that says Om Mane Padme Hum, then Hri at the end. They don't usually put the Hri at the end, but the Hri is the syllable of Avalokiteshvara. So what happens is, in the initial part, this Hri becomes, so you visualize the Hri above that moon, and then the Hri becomes Avalokiteshvara. Remember that that sound is the essential nature of Avalokiteshvara. The deity pours out light via down through that lotus stalk into your head and then out to all of the bodies of all the other creatures in the mandala. So that should be, you should be considering that as the deity pouring out light and compassion through that fontanelle, destroying negative karma and transforming the practitioner. All right, at that point, then one performs a requisite mantra practice, Om Mani Padme Om, reverence to him who bears the jewel in the lotus, Hum. In this text, we don't have a declared amount, but it would be at least 108. 108 is sort of the magical number of minimal mantras you ever say in any of these rituals in India or Tibet. In the conclusion of the ritual, the deity then dissolves into space and as clear light, and one should have an experience of everything in the mandala also melting away into clear light. Finally, one dedicates one's merit. So in that you say, hey, all of the good merit I could get from this may go to the liberation of all sentient beings. Remember, these are bodhisattva people who made that vow, so that's a standard thing. There should be some sort of carryover in which one sees in daily life some of these insights, in which one sees the bodhisattva within everything that one does in daily life and sees the bodhisattva all around them. All right, now for something completely different. I want to look at these hail protection rites that were written by Kitsun Sambo. So very quickly, these are wrathful deities. You have wrathful and peaceful deities. The wrathful ones are, let me see, how to say this best. You choose the right deity for the right ritual. So on the right, you see that that's Avalokiteshvara, but he's got a big belly, he's got a scary face, he's a little scary looking. On the left is Hayagriva, whose name means the horse's neck. He's the deity that's going to be used as the idam of these hail aversion rites. You'll see that he's covered in flames. He looks like a scary dragon. Now, a lot of Westerners get put off by these scary, wrathful deities at first, preferring, you know, that nice, peaceful, happy-looking Buddha guy. But then, generally through practice, almost everyone I know has gotten much more into the wrathful deities. Imagine that scary deity is stomping on your ignorance and your bad karmas. And after time, you start to look at these protector deities, these fierce deities, as absolutely compassionate. And their ferociousness is equal to their compassion. They have a fierce compassion. So while it's initially off-putting, these wrathful deities end up being very potent, not surprisingly. But in this ritual we're going to look at, it's a pragmatic ritual. It's not a transcendental one. So we're looking to get rid of hail. And hail is a big problem in Tibet. Hail not only kills crops, as if you've ever had a garden in Colorado, you'll see what happens when it hails. It really screws up your plants when you're growing them. But also hail can be so intense on the Tibetan plateau that it can kill people. So hail protection, big deal. All right. So as I said, this is a pragmatic rite. Oh, and I wanted to, remember when we were talking about the conversion of Maheshwara, when sort of the Indian god Shiva was giving the Buddha a hard time, won't convert to Buddhism. So the Buddha emanates a Vajradhara that's very wrathful. If you have a deity that's going to convert other deities or fight other deities, you're going to want a wrathful one. It makes sense. It's kind of intuitive. All right, so these hail averting rites are actually quite common in India. All yogis are known, especially the Nath yogis, are very famous for their ability to avert hail and to bring about hail when they need to mess somebody up. There's also a sort of psychic idea in Western occultism called cloud bursting. In this, one is able to either focus one's mind on clouds in order to cause them to split apart, and we'll see something kind of similar to this in the Tibetan context as well. Manipulation of rains is found throughout the world. We could do a whole class on rituals to manipulate the rains. So the original name of this text in translation, and Tibetan text titles do sound often like this. This is almost a short title. The tent for holding off ferocious fire and water, the instructions for guarding against hail through the secret accomplishments of Hayagriva. So this tells us a bunch of things. What it does, and who the main deity is are kind of the key ideas. And because it's the secret accomplishments, we know this is a tantric text. So our text here comes out of the Nyingma and Kagyu traditions. And it was written, well, it wasn't written by, it's a much older text. We don't really know too much about who originated it, but it was a Nyingma text. But it was commented upon by Ketsun Sangpo. He died in 2009. So he's been around. He was the author of many books on Tantra and Nyingma. He was a Nyingma Nakpa. Remember these guys, the Nakpas who are like the mantra practitioners. His father was a Nakpa before him and was also a master of hail aversion. Now, Ketsun Sangpo is famous for having written a 12-volume historical dictionary. What do I mean by historical dictionary? It means you would look up titles of names, philosophical concepts, places, and then he would have essays on those things. And that they're really useful when you're trying to understand Tibetan texts because there's so much shorthand and there's so many names. It's just, I find Tibetan very difficult on that because you need so much context. So he also worked with this woman, Anne Klein, who's a pretty famous Tibetologist. And he worked with a number of Tibetan Buddhism scholars. He lived in Kathmandu. Okay, so preliminaries. Oh yeah, I did want to make this other point. So Ketsun Sangpo gave him this elaborate training in order to perform these rites, and it took many years. And then he practiced for a couple of years, and then Ketsun Sangpo was like, "I am out of here. I'm not doing this." And he went off and became much more of a scholar. Ketsun Sangpo was asked why he had such resistance to this. And he said because there was an inherent violence to it. Because the hail is brought by deities. To get the deities to stop making hail, the Nakpa usually has to cause damage to deities. These rituals hurt these deities. They cause pain. He was always troubled by this. Anne Klein asked him at one point, said, "Well, you're doing this for the betterment of others, though. So doesn't all the bad karma come out in the wash if you do a little bit of damage to the deity, but you help a lot of other people?" And he says, "Not really, because the majority of these hail masters who we're doing it purely for the money. They hadn't generated sort of loving compassion for all the world. They were just doing it for the money. So it's doing rituals for money and hurting things. That's all bad." Okay, so what are the preliminaries of this rite? So in order to really perform these rituals, you have to do quite a bit of deity yoga and generation stage rituals. So the idea is that before you even go to do these rites, you generated oneself as the Idam here, Hayagriva. Ketsun Sangpo says that you can use any deity for this, but ferocious deities are the best. And since the text is said to be connected to Hayagriva, Hayagriva would be the one you want to go with. Also, the actual rituals that are done, and we'll talk about those in just a second, are considered sort of lower rites. Here, remember that word charya I said before. So these are specific physically enacted ritual actions. Also, one's going to do divinations. You have to look and see what deities are causing the hail, when the hail is coming, and what deities are doing it. There are strong and weak practices, ranging from emanating fire out of the body as Hayagriva to saying some pleasant mantras and offering some incense. This doesn't evidently work on rain clouds. They argue that sort of the hail cloud is very focused, but a rain cloud is very diffuse. So you can't focus the energy of the ritual on a rain cloud in the way you can a hail cloud, which I find intriguing and don't really understand. Okay, so in your prior generation stage, you would need to have your Wang, you need to have your initiation, you need to have training in how to do all of these rituals. You would need to accomplish your ability to visualize oneself as the Idam, as the deity, and you would need to do the appropriate sort of homa offerings, so fire offerings, to be prepared to do these ritual practices. Now, then you have to prepare the ritual. So what you got to do is you have to make ritual elements. So this includes making a tripod and an image of the deity to put in there. Then you would also have to make the purbas and the kilas, which are the ritual daggers and knives that are used in these practices. You'd have to get all the ingredients that are sometimes very difficult to get. Ketsun Sangpo said that his father was able to give him small amounts of all the ingredients so he could inherit all of these really rare to find ingredients to do the rituals. Also, you have to walk the area after, well, yeah, So you make these pills. So all these substances are put together in pills. These aren't pills you take. They're pills you like put in your pocket. They're like fetishes. They give you, they radiate magical power. Then you have to meet with the local guy, probably who called you out there, the local policeman, and then say, all right, while I'm doing these practices, everyone has to, I don't know, refrain from eating pork and keep eggs in their pockets. I don't know, whatever. And then the practitioner, or then the lawman would kind of observe people and see if anyone violated that. Because then if you do get hailed despite the ritual, you'd say, it's because they didn't do what I told them to do. And then the the hail maker walks around the space that is to be protected, radiating his magical might and doing divination to figure out what deities are there in those clouds. And then finally, during the summer season, which is the time of hail, he goes into a retreat in which he does this hail averting magic. All right, so what are these practices? So I said right off the bat, you got to build the yidam. The yidam, remember, is here. We're going to just say is Hayagriva. So an image of Hayagriva, and install that upon a tripod, sort of like you see here right on the right. Then you're going to make ritual daggers, and you're going to have consecrated substances. Now, these substances are right out of Indian magic. When I look at them, they're very familiar to me from the Tantra magic that I often study. So it includes earth struck by lightning, which is often used to avert or bring about hail or lightning, obviously. Melted hail water. Then also evocative, acrid substances, the blood of a black-haired dog, and, the powdered crazy jewels and whatnot. All right, so then one does a 27-day retreat before doing any of this. He does a 27-day retreat to perform generation stage practices, becoming very good at visualizing himself as Hayagriva, and also preparing all the materials. Now, a lot of magic in India is just performed without any magical descriptions. This Tibetan context explicitly says they do all of this generation stage deity yoga. I have my doubts. I think there were a lot of these hail makers that just did the rituals without doing the interior work. Because I think they saw that the power was in doing the ritual, not in the mental preparedness of the person. And that's a common theme I see in these ritual cultures. Then you meet with a local law guy and set out regulations for the villagers. And then this lawman would observe the villagers to make sure that there are no violations of these regulations. Should it not work out, then it's declared that the karma of the area was too strong, or that there have been violations to the regulations. Next, he sets out 4 huts in the cardinal directions, north, east, south, and west. And he has these special discs that he puts around the hut that sort of focus energy. Now, the practices can range. So in one sense, you might just burn cedar and say mantras to the Buddha. In another one, you may generate oneself as Hayagriva, who shoots fire out everywhere. And then there's a description of taking those poison pills and using a slingshot to shoot them at these other deities. And then there's also what I call cloud bursting. Now, in cloud bursting, one sort of looks at the cloud, uses that to figure out what deity is in the cloud, then focuses the energy along with the ritual practices to cause the clouds to disperse. Ketsun Sampo says that they're really easy to, well, not really easy, but the clouds can be dispersed if you catch them really early when they're small. And you can use pretty basic, pleasant techniques. But if the clouds are bigger or the hail has already started, you have to use more and more wrathful deities and more aggressive magical practices to break them up. So that is how they avert hail. So you'll notice that there is the appeal to generation yoga, or to the generation stage yogas here. So that would be doing similar practices to those Avalokiteshvara sadhanas. But those are what empower the person to do the rites of the hail bursting and the hail averting, which really is about doing these sort of specific rituals to a specific pragmatic end. So overall, our takeaway on this is I want you to think about transcendental versus pragmatic rituals. Once again, transcendental rituals that are, for the betterment of society, the betterment of the person, the betterment of the soul, and attaining realization. Pragmatic, I need to find my lost goat. I need to stop the hail. I need to get rid of this plague. I need to kill my enemy. I also want you to think about this process of going from people actually acting out rituals to internalized rituals, and what would be some of the strengths and the weaknesses. The strength is you can do the rituals anywhere. They're portable, they're visualized. You don't need to get all the elements. You visualize them and do them. The drawback from that, they're less evocative. They just are. When you're not physically doing them, they have less sort of psychological potency to you. I want you to think about sequences of practices. So generation stage and completion stage. Generation stage, visualizing yourself as this Buddha, rays of light, syllables, and mantra practices. Whereas completion stage, having these Gnostic revelations that there is no separation between this and that the ordinary mind is linked to the worldly mind. So that, you know, that inside the head is the full radiant self. Well, not full radiant self, is essential radiance that is limitless. So generation stage, completion stage. And then there's an idea that I quite like called the prescriptive imagination. This is something I think about a lot. These rituals that we can read about on these sadhanas, and there could be millions of them. Tibetan literature is so vast. It's not necessary that anybody ever does them. All one person has to do is the Lama has a vision of how to do a practice, and he writes it down. That's his prescriptive imagination. So he can imagine how you would do all these rites and elaborately explain how to do them, but that doesn't mean necessarily that everybody ever did them, or they do them in the exact same way the Lama says. And then finally, I want you to look at the difference between monks and nakpas once again. What, like this generation stage stuff that we talked about with, say, empowering the Torma, would be something a monk would do pretty regularly. Nakpas, on the other hand, nakpa mantra, are the ones that use powerful mantras to cause changes in the world. They both have their own spiritual sort of experiences, but they have very different ways of going about them, which is almost in that same line as clerical and shamanic. The monk being clerical, going through stages and sequences in text. The nakpa or shamanic, they have powerful mystical experiences that enable them to develop spiritual technologies to make changes in the everyday world. Thank you very much. I will see you next time.